Good day, my name is Michael Molondo, and I'm going to present the subject on psychological counseling for the third year. And we are going to cover the aspects of psychological counseling. We're going to look at different techniques. We're going to look at the key elements of social psychology. Then also we're going to look at how you can use counseling in palliative care. Counseling for orphans and vulnerable children. Then we are also going to look is how you can use counseling for families that are being affected, especially when it comes to bereavement counseling. We're going to look at counseling on a religious, spiritual aspect, how you can use religion and spirituality in counseling, specifically for people that are living with HIV/AIDS and that are also affected. And then we're going to look at the legal, the ethical principle of HIV/AIDS counseling. Then we are also going to look at how you can design a volunteer counseling and testing center, especially when you do testing and HIV counseling. Now, there are different processes that you can use and techniques that you can use. The first thing that one needs to understand about counseling is a process. You start somewhere and you end somewhere. Second aspect of counseling, it is a relationship between a counselor and a client. That relationship between the counselor and the client is very, very important. So it's very important for you to understand and to know that when you are going to counsel someone, you need to build a relationship. And the relationship is very important. And this is where you also need to help your client to talk about themselves. Because when somebody comes to you for counseling, the person needs to open up to you. And you as a counselor, you need to have listening skills, because 99% of the time you have to listen so that the client can talk. And it's very important also that during this time of counseling, the other technique that you can use is also to convince your client that your client must also come to a point to make a decision that will change his or her behavior. And it's very important that you need to encourage client, especially when it comes to you, and you need to counsel them. So convince them that it's not you as the counselor that makes the decision, but it is the client that needs to make the decision. And it's very important. Now, there are certain things that you have to do as a counselor to make sure that you win the confidence of your client. The first thing is you need to build rapport. You need to build that relationship with your client. That rapport needs to be built so that the client can know that there is communication, or there is a connection. So that connectivity between you and the client is very important. Empathy. So the client needs to know that you feel with him or her. And and it's very important that many times as a counselor, it's not what you say, it's your whole body language. Your whole body language must portray a language of empathy, feeling with you. And of course, being very practical, giving assistance. If the client starts to cry, having a tissue or a napkin ready, giving, to a client. If a client is thirsty, giving a client water. If a client feels the client wants to give up, being very practical and assistant. And of course, being in the action, asking questions, guiding the client. And of course, very important, respect. The client needs to know that he or she is respected. And of course, the whole issue of confidentiality and privacy. You have to keep the session very confidential and very private. So the client needs to know that he or she has the right to divulge or to open up towards you. Whatever the client wants to say, not to say, the client has the right. And it's very important, as I say, you as a counselor to apply very effective techniques. You have to have the following skills. And the first skills is you have to have listening skills. As I say, you have to listen to the client 99% of the time. You have to be attentive. You have to have observation. You have to reflect back to the client and say, you said that previously. What do you think about this? And of course, also make the file have a feel with the client and not being very cold, and then be able to summarize the whole session. So When we look at social psychology as another aspect of psychology, it's very important to look at what does social psychology look at. Social psychology is a scientific study of how people's thoughts, feelings, and behavior are being influenced by factors that's beyond, whether it's internal, whether it's external. So it's very important that certain people and which are the society can be influenced by certain factor. And it's very important for you as a psychologist or a psychological counselor to understand why people behave in certain way. Now, what influences people is actually certain events, their imagination, other people, the presence of family. So there are so many factors that can influence people's psyche so that people can behave and society can behave. Now there is another phenomenon, two kinds of phenomena when it comes to social psychology. There is the intrapersonal phenomena, and then the internal or interpersonal phenomena. The interpersonal phenomena is looking at the attitude that you have towards others, persuasion, the social cognitive. How do you perceive? How do you look at other people? How do you look at society? Self-concept. How do you look at yourself? What is your self-worth, your self-identity? And then the interpersonal phenomenon looks at the social influence. How does society influence you? What other social influences there? For an example, unemployment, high the high poverty within the country, so many things that actually influence the society. And then social psychology also look at social learning is how can we learn from society? How can we learn from the culture? How can we learn from different group dynamics and also from people? So HIV is very important. Now let's look a little bit at palliative care. Now, according to WHO, they define palliative care as a holistic approach to improve the life or the quality of people that are suffering from incurable disease. And it's not just looking at those patients that are suffering from incurable disease, but also looking at their family and looking at how one can relieve their suffering by early identification, and then also to look at treatment, how to relieve their pain, whether it's psychological, social, or spiritual. Now, the principle of palliative counseling is based on the following. The first thing that palliative care is looking at the management of symptoms. When somebody is bedridden or is having full-blown AIDS and is sleeping or can't help himself and is bedridden, there are certain symptoms that needs to be managed. For example, diarrhea, sweating, saliva, so many symptoms at once. So one of the principles is palliative care is looking at how can you manage the symptoms. Secondly, it looks at the psychosocial support. This person that's HIV and full-blown that cannot help itself, and most of these people are at the brink of dying, just bedridden, lying in bed. They are having psycho problems, so you have to give them that support as a palliative care. Other thing is teamwork and partnership. In palliative care, you can't work alone. You have to work with other team members. You have to work with a psychologist. You have to work with a clinical healthcare worker. You have to work with a social worker. So it's very important. And of course, the other principle that palliative care is also looking out or is based on is ethics and ethical consideration. So there are different areas of counseling that one can look at, especially when it comes to palliative care, HIV palliative care. One of the areas is the HIV prevention counseling, where one counsel someone not to prevent or not to get HIV or not to be infected with HIV. So you prevent, and this is mostly where you have the awareness raising. The second area of counseling is the disclosure, where somebody knows his HIV status and you counsel that person to disclose his or her status to a partner or to a family member. So that person needs to be counseled. And this is mostly during the post-test counseling. We have two types of counseling: the pre-test counseling, where somebody comes for counseling before the testing, post-test after the testing. And then, of course, which is very important, the treatment and medicine, how to use the ARV and how nutrition is very important. And also the other area of counseling is reproductive health, family planning, how to use family planning, when to use family planning, why to use family planning. And of course the other area of counseling is what we call the bereavement counseling. And bereavement counseling is is where somebody, a family member, actually died, or somebody death, and this is what we call the death counseling, where death occur within the family, and you have to counsel this person in order to deal with the reality of death and how to accept the reality and how to deal with different emotions when it's come to the death of a loved one. The other area of counseling that you can use is orphans and vulnerable children. Now, HIV/AIDS is having an impact on children that are living without parents, children whose parents are being infected, whose parents die because of HIV, because of AIDS. And these children are most of the time very vulnerable. And because they don't have a father or a mother or any relatives, they are going through a psychological impact or psychological situation where it impacts them psychological. And it's very important that these children needs to be counseled as much as possible. Now, how does HIV impact those children or affect those children? They affect them economically. Many of the children, because of their parents, they become poor. They find themselves that they don't have money to buy food. They don't have money to buy clothing. Education, of course, they can't finish their school. They can't go to university. They can't study because there's no money. Social effect, they have been stigmatized. Society stigmatized them, ostracized them, reject them. Of course, and then, as I say, psychological effect, blaming themselves that they are orphans, blaming themselves that they are street children, blaming themselves that their parents died, and the whole aspect of going through that psychological pressure can actually have a great impact, negative impact on children. So that's why counseling for orphans and vulnerable children is a very important area or aspect. So the other signs also one can look at it when you look at orphans and vulnerable children, especially when you counsel them, is signs where you know that they need care. For example, malnutrition, poor hygiene, their health, how they behave, the signs of their behavior, and of course also physical and sexual abuse. So these are, and many of those orphans and vulnerable children are staying with friends or with people that are actually abusing them verbally, physically, and of course also sexually. And that's why counseling is very important for orphans and vulnerable children. Now, how does counseling also play a role for people that are being affected, especially family members, children, and those that are going through bereavement? Now, there are many issues that a family goes. Many times we only think that HIV only affect people that are living with the disease, but it also affects family members, friends, relatives. And there are different stages that you go through, and there are many issues that sometimes family goes through. The first issue is betrayal, that they don't believe, and this is where the denial comes in. Family members, they don't believe, or they deny that somebody is HIV positive or a family member is infected with a disease. It's just feeling, going into the denial stage. The other issue is a family member can start to stigmatize or discriminate the family member that's HIV positive. Other issue is disclosure of HIV status, or the notification of a partner. This is where it's very important that family needs to be counseled. They need to be prepared, whether it's as a spouse, whether it's a family member, whether it's a partner. Counseling is very important. Then, of course, treatment and medicine is also another very important aspect that one has to look at when it comes to family counseling. So there are many signs that a family experiencing, and many times family needs specialized counseling. And some of the signs that one normally look through or sees is grief, complicated grief, severe depression, a lot of disturbing memories of the person, especially when somebody died, and feelings of anxiety that are very persistent, and of course physical complaints like headaches, depression. So these are many aspects that one has to look at. The other area of counseling is religious and spiritual counseling, and especially for people living with HIV/AIDS and family members that are affected. Now, it's very important that people living with HIV/AIDS don't just depend on physical care. They also want spiritual care, because they want to believe that if they are going to die, that there is life after their death. So they need to be consoled to know that when they are dying or they are on the point of death, that they want to console or to reconcile with family members, especially where there was conflict or family or separation of family members. And spiritual counseling actually help family members who have been separated because of conflict or misunderstanding to reconcile. Because when somebody is at the point of death, and this person wants to make sure that he or she makes right with the family. And this is where spiritual care is very important, or what we call pastoral care. So the spiritual and religious counseling is based on the following model, which are very famous and which are used worldwide. And we call it the BESS model. It's an abbreviation of BESS. Now, B stands for biological. Somebody that's HIV positive does not just need a biological support, which means it's just medicine and antiretroviral drug and nutrition. So biological support is very important, but as much as that person needs biological support, the person also needs emotional support, which means emotionally the person feels very discouraged, the person feels psychological that there is no need to live life again, and emotionally the person needs to be encouraged and supported. The other S is social. The person needs to be supported, the social status of the person, especially when the person is going to disclose his or her status. He or her social status needs to be protected. And then the other S then stands for the spiritual support. So the BESS model can be applied, especially for people living with HIV/AIDS. And it's very important that one needs to look that when you're going to apply religious or spiritual or pastoral counseling, you need to have the following characteristic. Of course, you need to be compassionate. You need to build rapport. You need to have that sense of emotional. You need to show interest to your client. You need to show care and have that caring relationship. And it's very important that you need to interact. Now, when it comes to counseling or psychological counseling and HIV counseling, there are certain legal and ethical principles that you need to adhere to. The first principle is autonomy, which look at the independence of the person. That the client needs to feel that he or she's independent from everybody else, and he or she can make choices that can actually determine he or her future. The other principle is non-maleficence, which means that you will not put any harm on a client. The client will be protected from any harm. Beneficence, which means you will promote the good and the well-being of the client. And of course, justice, which means you will make sure that you are fair and committed towards the client. And then fourthly, vitality of fidelity, which means that you will be honest towards your client. You will not just make empty promises, but you will put your money where your mouth is. You will not deceive the client, and you will not exploit the client. So it's very important for you to know that your HIV or counseling is based on principle that needs to be ethical. So doing HIV counseling or psychological counseling, it's very important that you have to look at the setting. You have to look at where you're going to apply, or where you're going to do counseling. And one of the location or places where counseling is very much more important is at the VCT Centre, which we call the Volunteering Counseling and Testing Centre, where clients come in for volunteering counseling and then testing so that they can know their status. Now, the VCT counseling or type of counseling is based on the following principle, or VCTs are actually based on the following principle. They are based on high quality service, high quality product. They are based on equality and equity, which means every client that comes into that VCT center is equal, will be treated equal. Then, of course, referral to comprehensive service after the client knows his status, and especially when the client is tested HIV positive, the VCT center is there to refer the client for follow-up services in order to receive ARV. And then cost-efficient, sustainable services, which are also very important, that whatever the VCT is doing, it's cost-effective, it's sustainable. And then, of course, but not least, the last is community. The community needs to take ownership of VCT centers. Now, when we look at the design of a VCT center, a VCT center needs to have counseling rooms, which are very important to ensure that you can have different clients, different for different session. And some of the VCT rooms also have a one-way mirror. The reason is to protect the privacy and for the confidentiality of the client, if not be. And then, of course, especially when it comes to children that are HIV positive or children that are being abused, to have a way where you have a role play session with these children, so that children, because many times children cannot say or explain in words what they experience, but they can play it out by showing it by action. And it's very important that when you design a VCT center, you need to have a role play room for session. And then of course, what's very important, every VCT is based on qualities, and the VCT center looks at the following qualities. The first quality, it looks at the site where it is built. Secondly, the privacy, the ventilation, the aircon, the waiting room of the client where they have to wait, confidentiality and privacy, and then also the quality of support services, the HIV testing, and of course cost and sustainability. So I have come to the end of my presentation, and I thank you for listening to me, and I hope that you will be ready for your test, your assignment, and for your exam. Thank you, and bye.